So now that we've kind of gone over that pose analysis little hurdle, there might be a few who's still making one or two little tweaks, changing a joint movement here and there, refining the actions here and there. But all round the analyses, however you say it, they all looked really good. So well done. I know that the videos were helpful, and I hope the analyzing it yourself and in your body and with the videos helped you guys understand what's required of poses and how we can teach them. So after the pose analysis, before we dive into the sequencing, are there any questions you have, or are there anything you want to share or add? Good. Okay. So just one thing I picked up from the pose analysis was that, especially when it comes into like what needs, well, depending on the complexity of the poses that some of you guys chose, sometimes what we need to warm up and stretch, or the skill required, sometimes there's quite a lot of things written under there. And some of you guys would have seen that I emailed back saying what helps is to refine one or two things, especially when we speak about skill and action, to focus on, because we want to weave that into our sequence. So just like when you do your crow pose and Laura says to you, look forward, lean forward, those are the actions that she's bringing in when she's doing plank knee to noses, when she's doing a straddle leaning forward. So having like a little phrase or something that weaves into the class brings in that idea repetitively, so that by the time we get to the peak pose, students are like, okay, cool, I got this. And that depends on your pose. For wheel pose, it's push. So you want to bring that push in when you're doing your plank to down dog, when you're doing dolphin to down dog, whatever the case may be, it's that action. There's a lot going on. Yes, it's the hand placement, it's it's the, there's a lot going on, but it's the push that's going to help the students the most. So there's a lot of skill involved, but the action is going, okay, how am I going to get my students there? What's the cue that's going to help them the most? Okay. So when, if I told you to refine it a bit, you might have said, oh, okay, I know I need to stretch my lats and my pecs, shoulder, spine. You know what I mean? It's like with regards to muscle names and details, we don't have to go into that as much for the sake of the pose analysis. It's good to know. But what helps is just by simplifying it, our sequences will be a lot easier to refine. It looked like I froze there. Did that message come through loud and clear? Cool. Okay, amazing. All right, so now that we've done our pose analyses, we're going to move into our summary template. So that's on page 35. And the only thing that's new from that, that's now due on the 10th, which is next week, Wednesday, is that you are now going to choose 12 to 15 poses that are preparation for your peak pose. So if you've got a pose that needs hamstring warming and shoulder flexion, you are going to choose 12 to 15 poses that give me hamstring stretching and shoulder stretching. If your action was, oh, I need an active back leg, one of the reasons I need poses that bring in an active back leg. Okay. And so it's very often that the poses we choose either have similar joint movements, they're stretching the similar things, they require the same muscles to work or be strong in that pose, or they bring in the same skill. So for example, in your crow pose sequence, you've got a wide-legged forward fold where our legs are abducted to the side. And yeah, it's giving us a bit of a hamstring stretch, which we don't really need for crow pose, but my hands on front, I'm leaning forward, I'm getting into my wrist extension. And so because of that leaning forward, that pose can count as one of the 12 to 15 because it's bringing in the action. All right. So your sun salutations. So remember, the poses that don't count are your mountain pose, your downward facing dog, what was the one, and your modifications. So for example, dolphin is a modification for pincher, it doesn't count as a pose, but three-legged dolphin might be okay. because it's bringing in a little bit more. Can be used more towards one of the end poses. I would like at least 12 good ones. Numbers 13, 14, and 15 can be more working towards the pose. Also, remember there are some poses that get grouped together. So Wild Thing and Three-Legged Downward Dog will most likely count as one, and your lunges. So don't write low lunge, high lunge, lizard lunge. You know what I mean? Those are like the same thing. So just so that we can rather get into a whole lot of different areas. Any questions on the 12 to 15 poses? When you send me a list, because you guys have been really nice and concise in your pose analysis, I feel like I'm getting really nice, short and condensed things. The more complicated it is for you, if I've asked you to refine it or to shorten it or focus on the big things, rather send it back to me first, just so we make sure we get those pinpoints, so you don't go choose poses and we could have maybe refined it or changed a couple of things. So if I said it's fine, it's good, then when you send me your 12 poses list, you're going to send me the name of your pose, and then next to it, you're going to tell me why you chose it. 1, max 2 words, really short. So I chose pyramid because hamstring stretch, or I chose Gomukhasana arms because tricep stretch. Okay. Those reasons that you've put there will be what you wrote in your pose analysis of what you need in your pose. So it's kind of like a tick box. So you probably highlighted in total between strength, flexibility, and skill, 5 or 6 words or things that are needed. And those are what are going to come up in the 12 to 15 poses. I keep having another thought and then forgetting about it. So poses. It'll come to me later. Okay, it doesn't matter. Any questions? Because now I'm blank. Good. Okay. So remember, your 12 to 15 poses are not the only poses that are going to come into your sequence. They are just the poses that we want to use to get into the prep pose, and we use them with transitional poses to move through a sequence because we need to add in a little bit more fluff. Okay, we can repeat poses. We can have certain poses that come into the warm-up, some poses that come into the full body. You are eventually going to write a full sequence that's 60 minutes, which is going to include your warm-up and your cool down. Remember that we go into this sometimes thinking of yoga in there, or yoga postures in their traditional form. So we think of triangle as such, but remember, you can also do your Supta Utthita Hasta Padangasthasana, which is pretty much a triangle on your back. You can do it in side lying. So remember, you can change orientation. You can weave in different variations. So like I said, I've got my thought, there it was. So for example, high lunge and high lunge with Gomukhasana arms, they don't count as different things, they count as the same things. So it's more looking like poses and its variation will be combined together. Okay. And I want them to be progressive. So essentially, you're going to start and rank them from your easier poses to your harder poses. So that's going to make it easier, because when you sequence, you'll tend to just have them in that order. They're in the correct order. And now you're going to just say, how am I going to transition between them? Okay, yes, Mick. I forgot whether it's Michaela or Misaela. Now I just call you Mick because it's easier.
It's fine. It's Michaela though.
Yeah, maybe the C kind of throws me off. I feel like it needs to be more extravagant.
I know, my dad had to be weird when he named me. I wanted to ask, so, I mean, when we do the classes with Lauren, you can see it very clearly. So like in the crow class, she often puts us in positions that you would be able to call that pose a name, but then the way she changes it, you know, like the wide-legged forward fold, where she made us put chaturanga arms, look forwards, lean forwards, or skandasana, doing the same thing. Would we then, when we're doing the summary like template, put the name of the pose and do a description of how we would change the arms, how we would do that for it to facilitate the peak pose, or would we do that?
You can write, you can make up, don't make up your own name because then I won't know what you're talking about. But for an example, let's say one of the previous students, they were doing, I just have to use this as an example because it makes the most sense to me. But she was doing pincher with a scorpion. So it's pincher, forearm balance with the back bend, feet working towards head. That was the pose she chose. And so she wanted to do from all fours, bend your knee, so you're kind of finding that same scorpion tail, just one leg, and then chaturanga. And she just said forearm tiger variation, so I know, okay, tiger is that one, but she's doing it on her forearms. That's fine. If I don't know, I'll WhatsApp you and say, what pose is this, and you can message me. But if it's a different variation, you can say, I want to do for example, you can do clasping of the hands into a humble warrior, either in a warrior 1 or in a warrior 2. You can do warrior 2 and fold forward into a humble warrior shape. So you can have variations of poses in different ways, and you'll just explain that to me. But don't write too much, like keep it as short as possible. So in that case, you'll say wide-legged forward fold, chaturanga arms. Then I'll be able to put 2 and 2 together. Yeah. Okay. And I would encourage that, because sometimes let's say, even, let me think of an example that will be pretty useful. Sometimes the pose in its original form can be super useful to us, but maybe we need to add something a little bit more onto it. So yes, I need a high lunge for this pose, but it would be great if I could do a high lunge with a tricep stretch for a wheel pose, because I need triceps and I need to stretch my quads or my hip flexors. Yeah. So that now I've got one pose that does 2 things, which amps it up, which means I can just add in a little bit more. Remember the complexity of your pose. So Michaela's chosen tortoise, really, really a lot of hamstrings, big forward fold, got to get my elbows underneath there. There's a lot happening. So she can't spend too much time doing, yes, your supine hamstring pose will be fine, but then she's got to get into a lot more hamstring poses quite soon on. So we don't want to spend too much time doing our gentle warming. Sometimes we need to get into stronger poses a lot sooner. So you might start in all fours, do something like quickly, and then straight to down dog. Cool, let's get into some pyramids and wide-legged forward folds. So depending on the complexity of your pose, you need to grade where you start so that we can get where we need to be within 35 minutes, which happens very quickly. Okay. All with me on that?
Yes, thank you.
Cool, thank you. So when we get into our I keep losing my thought today. I'm really thinking of the next one and I forgot this one. Okay, so that will be essentially your summary template. You'll also give me 3 to 4 cool down poses. Cool down poses are pretty general. So they're usually more of your gentle side, and you'll just highlight 3 or 4 of those that will work. Okay. That's literally all that's required of the summary template that you'll get to me on Wednesday. Right? So it's just, yes, Nicole, just the 12 poses, 15 poses.
Is this pose different from the pose that we ended in this week? So
no, same pose.
Oh, same pose.
Yeah. So you're just going to build on for it, because now you've analyzed it. Now you know that pose really well, and you can start finding poses that can get you there. Right. You guys know your poses really well. Okay, cool. We're all good with regards to the summary template. Just a reminder that we will definitely be adding in more poses. So one of the general responses I'll say to you is that this pose, take it out, it's more of a transition pose, which doesn't mean, it might bring in what you need, but maybe we can find something better, because we've only got 12 to 15 spots. We really want to be quite specific on how much that pose is going to help us. Okay. We also want to consider, and this is okay for your prep poses, that sometimes we need a little bit of general warming. So in some of your pose analysis, for example, Catherine would say, okay, this pose is mostly hip flexion and this and this and this, but it helps to get some general mobility. So bringing in, if you're doing back bends, bringing in side bends and twists is also helpful. So I'm going to do a lunge, but I'm going to do a side bend in my lunge and twist in my lunge, just like you guys do in your mermaid poses. Okay. If I'm doing something with my hips, it's also nice to do a little bit of external rotation, a little bit, try to get a bit, particularly for those of you guys who chose like there's a couple of splits, an 8 angle, and even yours, Michaela, some general hip stretching also helps, because even though I maybe need in my pose hamstrings, it's also nice to get a little bit into adductors, a little bit into the bum muscles, not too much, but a little bit into the glutes would probably be the best way to describe it. Not too much, but more some general things help, okay? So even if my, like your mermaid pose, doing something like the reverse warrior with the Gomukhasana arms, that little variation, and then moving between a high lunge twist and then that stretch, is just getting all movements of the spine. So keep that in mind, that we want to keep it refined, but what we've written down, maybe you need a little bit of extra this, extra that, which you can bring in as variations to your normal poses through arm movements or twists or side bends, okay? Those often weave their way in with your transitions too. So although high lunge might be one of my prep poses, when I start sequencing for it, do high lunge, side bends, twists, then do a warrior 2, then maybe do a revolve just to get a bit of side body in. So we can add those in as transitions to fluff it up. Good. Okay. So that should be pretty fine and simple. Remember that you can pull from different poses and get creative in it. That should be really fun. Then you're going to get, once you send that through to me, I'm going to say, yes, your poses look amazing. You guys are all doing a great job. Then you're going to get into your full template. Okay. This is probably one of the trickier parts, but it's where it's the part where you actually start putting a class together, and it's going to be so much nicer because then you're actually going to start teaching what you guys know, which is always helpful. It's always easier to teach something that you've created because it makes sense in your brain. So if you look on your page 36, I'm just recapping from what we covered from the first time, because now we've gone a little bit further in the process and we know where we are. So you've got your 12 to 15 poses that you've numbered and written progressively in black. And then you have 2 components of every number. You've got your first one, which is the action in the pose. That's what you're doing. It's not so much cues. You don't have to say start seated, extend your left leg out. This is just to say, if I'm in the pose, so for example, there in the example that you've got in your overview, Laura's written it very shorthand. So when I move to head to knee, hamstring stretch, and side lying triangle, so that's kind of like holding the leg out in front of you, then I roll onto my side and I've got my leg sideways. She just says, hold your leg, draw it down to the front of you, swap sides, then move it across your body. So if there's variations within that pose that you're doing, that's what you write in red. It's like a sentence or 2. So it would be, once you're in high lunge, side bend, cactus arms, twist, and then the transition would say, open up into a warrior 2, star, and then your next pose might be wide-legged forward fold. I went through that very quickly. Did that make sense? So red is what you're doing in that pose. The blue is what links pose number 1 to pose number 2. A transition doesn't necessarily mean only open up and then your next pose is warrior 2. It can be, a transition can be a couple of poses that you take to get there. That's what makes the sequence a little bit longer. So using this example, this is a little bit of a fierce and feisty one, but it really does help. Bear in mind that you will come back to poses often and repeat them throughout the class. So for example, when you've done all your warm-up poses, then the first time you do pyramid, you'll say, okay, step to high lunge, and then I'm going to have pyramid as the black number. Then underneath that, it's going to say straighten your front leg, arms down. Whether you're doing a passive pyramid, whether you're doing an active pyramid, that's what you classify there. Then your transition can be come back into high lunge, open up, flow, 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 flow. The next time that you do pyramid, it'll just be in one of the transitions, okay? Because you've kind of highlighted that as one of your prep poses, and you might repeat it later on as you move through the flow, but it's always the new addition that will be highlighted as one of the numbers. That makes sense. It's kind of tricky to explain, but I think you guys get it. All I want is to not have like 20 numbers or 30 numbers, even though you're doing pyramid 5 times. Just highlight it once. This is what we have found to be a very useful way to sequence it in this way, because it kind of sheds light on the peak the prep poses, and then it also helps you get from one to the other. This, I would recommend keeping it shorthand and direct. We don't have to write inhales, exhales. You can just say 3-legged dog, step between hands, or you can even just say 3-legged dog, high lunge, side bends, warrior 2. It needs to just make sense. You don't have to go open up the arms, keep your front, you know what I mean? So don't get into the queuing, because then you'll end up writing like 10 pages and you'll be sad. So it's easier, the shorter it is, the better. Things that I'll be looking for is obviously that the poses are fine and that the transitions make sense. So for example, sometimes being up, down, up, down, up, down isn't always conducive for the flow of the class. So you might start seated, then do your flow. You can come through to lying later using a nice fun transition to get them there. Doesn't always have to be in that chronological scope of sorts, but it just needs to make sense. The easiest way to know that is to practice it in your body and to see, can I do this? Does it make sense? Do I know where? Does it make sense in the feet most of the time to transition between them? Would I know how to teach this? And that's one of the things that I pick up. The next thing that often comes out is that our sequences are too short. So once you put your sequence together, the best thing that you can do is to get on your mat and to move and go, okay, where do I feel my body wants to go next? What makes sense? Where, you know, if my sequence is too short because I've practiced it, can I repeat a sequence building on? Hint to people who have done the mermaid sequence, you guys, all of the other sequences, Laura does a flow that start with your side bends, and then the second time she repeats it, adding on a figure 4 and a dances. You can repeat flows, adding on another one. Okay. First time you do a flow, you might move through a warrior 3. The second time you might do a standing splits. So there's similar sequences, so the students do feel familiar with it, but they're either adding on or they got something slightly different. I think you guys all have a little bit of a taste of that, and you would have seen that now in your teaching practicals, how it becomes sort of repetitive. Good indication is to start with a nice warm-up. Then you generally have a less intense flow, which is like either a kneeling, and then you get into about 2 or 3 flows, 2 or 3 flows, and then you'll get to your peak pose, and then you'll just highlight your cool down. Okay. One more final thought. Remember that your prep poses, you might want to include something before your prep poses. So if my first prep pose is half splits, I'm not going to start my class in half splits, but I might start seated, do some seated cat cows, do some side bends, straighten my legs, do a nice gentle Paschimottanasana, roll over, cat cow, cool. Now let's get into that. So just keep that in mind. All you're going to do then, if that's the case, is before your number 1, you're just going to write something in blue, which will count as your transition before your starting pose. It gives us, it's like a prelude, just so that we know where we're starting, what comes before. So it'll also give you something to play around and practice with. Will a repeat pose count as a pose? Are they different? Or do you mean if I do pyramid twice, does it count as 2? Is that what you're asking?
Okay, so not like, so transition poses won't count as a part of the 15.
No, so before we get into even the transitions, we're just highlighting 12 to 15 prep poses. There will be so many more transitions, but I'd rather 12 to 15. And you'll have that list before you get into the summary. You will have that summary list before you get into the full template. So it'll be a lot easier that's why we do it in stages. Like, okay, I got my sequence. Now I just need to tie it all together. Okay, your own teaching style will come through. Okay, so the way in which you naturally move, let that be the way that you teach. Okay. Just as a highlight, I loved my beautiful essays I got about your teaching practicals. I felt I was there with you guys, but just keep it short because it's going to help you guys as well. Sometimes I might ask you to add more in, but purely that's coming from a point if it's not long enough. But as a max, that full sequence template should be 3.5 pages. You might add more in your own capacity, but for this one, keep it simple, because we're going to share our sequences, and by keeping it shorthand, it helps other teachers kind of also interpret it and add their own flair to it. Okay, so it should be quite shorthand, and that's okay. I've learned how to read in shorthand, so it's helpful. If the case comes up where you send me your sequence and I don't know a transition, if you've created something, I remember in the last training, teachers were doing side planks to twisted down dog, and they were actually really, really cool, but I didn't quite know what she meant. I'll just say, send me a short little video of this, just so that I've got it in my mind. But you guys do come up with awesome ideas as transitions. And so that's the only things that will really happen with this. Just as we said in our teaching prac, yeah, keep away from anything too anatomical, too detailed. Just simple instruction of poses and transitions. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Because I'm definitely happy to leave you guys sooner, but I also want to use the time just to see if in your individual poses that you've chosen, are there any uncertainties you have about choosing your 12 to 15 poses? Are you, especially if you're unsure, would this pose be okay for that? Would this one be for that? I mean, we can chat in our own capacity, but I'll try to let you guys go like 30, 40 minutes earlier. Sinead.
Sorry, Taryn. In Catherine's video of handstand, she speaks a lot about getting people on their hands, and then at the end she says, but not too much, which you've obviously said before. But she says that it is important that you actually do. It's not just like other balances, like you do want people to get in certain arm balances before handstand, like how much is too much?
So this is a very good question, because I think it also relates. We don't have anyone doing really any major twisting poses, but I also, just because I'm doing a twist, I don't want 12 to 15 poses that are a twist, because that means that every pose I come to is going to be twist, 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 and I'm going to be tired. The same with you. Is that handstand, we want to get the students on their hands to get that leaning. We want to do like get that pushing action, get that wrist extension. So we need to bring in that sensation, but I wouldn't do 20 chaturangas. In fact, I wouldn't even do a chaturanga in that class. I would just do plank to down dog pushes, because it's really that straight on thing we need. And then bring that leaning in a plank, bring that leaning in your wide legged. But then also, because you need your hamstrings, which you've also shown in your pose analysis, gets you time to get off your hand. So you're balancing your sequence so that I'm spending time on my hands, but I'm also getting off my wrists, because if I just do I've actually done a class which was pretty much planks and side planks all the time. And then she wanted us to do something like a wheel. And I just thought, no, there's just no way my arms are going to do that right now. So balance the distribution in your sequence between arm-based things. Remember, we can't build strength for handstand in one class, but we can definitely get that action going and then do some flows on the feet, on the hands, leaning. You might bring in a bakasana or something to get that lean. And then, because a lot of you guys have chosen challenging poses, you will have to workshop it a bit. You'll have to go to the wall, do a few walks up the walls, practice a couple of kicks, those types of things. And so for the tricky poses, especially if you want to show your students how to get into it, those have chosen 8 angle, or you need to kind of figure that pose out. And so you will set aside about 5 minutes, 10 minutes in some places, where you might, okay, let's practice it with the blocks, let's try it with this, because it takes time to get the student into the pose if you're teaching it in isolation. So that would be my one tip. And also, it's like in Sinead's case, if she's doing a handstand, we're not going to do chaturangas every single time we do a vinyasa. Okay. Or let me rather say, I wouldn't recommend it. You can definitely do it. It's possible. People do it in Ashtanga all the time. It's just more about conserving energy for the peak pose, which is what we want. So there's no, like I said, I think the last time, there's no, oh, this is too much, this is too little. It's about finding a nice balance. And the only way you'll know that is when you start teaching it and your students are like tired after 15 minutes and you go, no, we only get to our handstands in 25 minutes. So yeah, and then do another thing, because I'm just rolling with ideas, do the shape in different positions. Sometimes I think Catherine mentioned in a video, just standing and extending the arms up, just getting proprioception with my hands and doing it, coming down onto my back, check in, use your rests quite cleverly as well. Okay, I think that was pretty helpful to everyone as well, because a lot of us have chosen arm balances and things, so we need to get that skill of the arms, but we don't need to do it all in some ways. And if I need to use my arms, can I use them in the way, if it's a part of the body that will tire, can I at least use it in a way that's helpful for my pose? If my leg's going to tire, can I at least use poses that are efficient for that pose, prep pose for that peak pose? Because then I'm at least using it for a reason. I'm not just using it without reason. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say, and then give you guys the space to ask questions. But the questions might come next week when you start doing your pose analysis, your sequences. Cool. We look happy. Elaine and Dee, and then I think we're done.
Yeah, sorry, Sharon, my question's got less, isn't about the sequencing. I feel quite good about that. It's just about the format for tomorrow. Just because I'm frantically, there's like about 3 or 4 poses that I still am struggling with. And I just want to know, are we going to have time to practice them tomorrow in between sessions, or is it like a jam-packed day?
But you got your time slot, so that's just, yes. You will only be doing that time slot. The rest of the time you're not doing anything. Or you're asking, in that time slot, will I be busy the whole time?
So we having a morning session? And so it's just the morning session and the time slot, is that right?
I'm a bit confused. I'm going to clarify with Lauren. I'm going to get her to email you. I didn't get the time slot email, so I'm not going to answer and give you the wrong answer. I would imagine that maybe one of you guys can answer, because it's, as I understand it, you'll just be in your time slot and you'll be quite busy in your time slot. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, yes. And we won't join.
Sorry.
We don't join the other slots.
Yeah, you don't join the slot that you haven't been allocated.
Yeah, so there's an arm balance class at 10:30 to 1. I don't think that's for everybody, right? And either side of that, you've got your slots. Yeah.
Yeah, so your arm balance class and your lecture with Indivu tomorrow. So from 10:30 to 3:30, you'll be busy with Catherine and Indivu. Before that and after that, you're just busy in your time slot allocation. Cool. Indivu is also lovely. It's going to be fun. Dee?
Karen, I'm nervous about this thing now. So I just want to clarify. So the sequencing to get up to peak pose, we have to only submit that for now. That's all you want. It's just the sequence up to 12 to 15 poses coming up to the peak pose.
On Wednesday. On Wednesday, just your 12 to 15 poses for you. Now,
okay, so now I understand that they have to be linked, obviously, in a flow. But so when we submit them from 1 to say 15, and we start to continue then with the full template, do we have to use them in that order? So must we plan now?
No, it might change. It might change. I want to see it progressively, but when you actually start looking at it practically in the case of the sequence, sometimes you do have to move things around in order to make sense. It's not set in stone. So just send me 12 to 15 poses, generally from what you would classify as easiest to hardest. When you get into the sequence, you might have to shuffle and move around. add in a bit more in the transitions. But just focus on step 1 for now. The rest will come once you have your skeleton. You'll feel a
Okay.
lot better.
Thank you.
You, Annalise.
So I just want to clarify about tomorrow, the reviews. She's basically just going to look at us and where she can help us, right? It's not going to be like an exam.
No, don't have to worry, Annalise. We got your back. No, so remember, you've got 2 pose reviews. You've got some this weekend, and you've also got some next weekend. So this is a way to see. Laura might give you some feedback. She might chat, work on this, do this. It's also a good trial run for you guys to see how familiar am I, what are things I want to work on, and then next week you have another one. But don't stress. We want to see you guys do well. We're here to let you guys do well. But I know it's stressful, so that's fine. But keep your pose review questions for Laura, because she'll answer them way better than I will. Dee, one more question. No? Okay, cool. All right. If any questions come up as you guys go along, please, you guys know you can email me or WhatsApp me. Punctually prepare your, just some alliteration from Matt. Punctually prepare your prep poses with purpose for your peak pose performance, please. Yeah, but do that before your pose review, please. So once again, it's due on Wednesday. If it's done earlier, that's fine, no pressure, but as always, early is appreciated because it just drags them out, so it means I can mark them nicely for you guys, but when they are ready. And if that's that, then that's a wrap. Cool, thank you. Amazing. The rest is fine. Elaine, I sent you an email. So I actually want to know if you wanted to